Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome whenever, wherever you are tuning in from to Taking the Tradition On. We are in series 7. And this series is Archetypes Unlocked. We're going to be here for about an hour of conversation, exploration, and I'm sure there will be a little bit of storytelling sprinkled in here and there as well. But this is an in conversation and a discussion rather than being a storytelling concert. As always, I would like to thank my amazing, fantastic patrons who make all of this possible, who help to create this space and mean that it is free and openly accessible to anybody who wants to join in, either live or later. So in this series, we are exploring archetypes, quintessential characters that appear over and over again in myth and folktale, characters and symbols that act as a shorthand for our brains to decode the world. And tonight my guest is Laura Packer. She is an amazing American storyteller. She's got huge numbers of plaudits and awards to her name, including being admitted to the very prestigious National Storytelling Network Circle of Excellence. You can always go to her website later and then you will just see the lists of awards and how completely amazing she is. But tonight, she is here for you to get to know her a little better, her approach to storytelling a little better, and to explore the archetype that she has chosen, which is the Tyrant King. So please put your virtual hands together in a huge round of thunderous applause for the amazing Laura Packer. Hooray! Welcome, welcome, welcome,
so
welcome.
Happy to be here.
I'm completely delighted that you have agreed to join us, Laura. And I'm also quite excited, intrigued and slightly mischievous, but also really delighted to shout about your archetype, the Tyrant King. So I guess the first question is, I know why I would choose this as an archetype at this particular moment, but why have you picked the Tyrant King for your archetype for us to unpick and explore in this hour?
First off, thank you for having me, Amy. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation and to the conversation with everybody who is here live and who might watch later. So thank you. I just wanted to start with gratitude. I wish that I could say that I wanted to explore the Tyrant King because it was so old and outdated, and we as a species are so enlightened that that would never happen again. But we are not that enlightened. And the Tyrant King has happened over and over and over again in human history and is happening with great violence right now in the United States, where I am. As an American, the Tyrant King has been either historical or over there, and over there aghast, seeing that it's happening over there, wherever over there may be, but it's happening here. And so I am in the midst of it. We are in the midst of it. And it seems like a good time to look back at the stories that people have told about surviving and overcoming and enduring, because those lessons are very alive right now for me and millions of others in the United States and elsewhere. I picked this because it's alive.
Yeah, well, it's topical and it's essential, and I have to admit to not necessarily giving you entirely free hand. I mean, I did say you could choose whatever you wanted, but I suppose one of the things that I think we are likely to talk about tonight, certainly I'm going to ask you about later, is about the role of the storyteller in difficult situations and the role of a storyteller in lands of tyrants. And I personally have found your stories during this time incredibly helpful and a window into what's going on in America at the moment. Um, I mean, so obviously you've anonymized everything, but you have been a voice that is telling us what is really going on. And I know you, and I know that it's not AI generated, and I know that I can trust you as a source in a way that I have not been getting. A real picture of what is happening in America. So I listened to the BBC and they have been talking about what's going on, but I don't think it's been getting the coverage that it really should have. Um, and the BBC has all of these bias rules that I think in some situations just don't work. And I don't think it is a huge picture because they're trying to make it 50-50. Obviously, as a country, I think that you know, well, Trump's been trying to sue the BBC and putting it into a
Mhm.
very difficult position, and they're trying to keep their voice alive and heard, which means that maybe they can't give the whole picture. And so when I first started seeing your stories, I was just absolutely horrified and thinking, what can I do? What can I do? Is just, somebody here is sitting in a very rural place in England, and I thought, what I can do is at least give you a platform and give places for your words to be heard. And I actually think that that's one of the most powerful things that you can do,
Mhm.
and you've got such a strong voice. And so I did slightly push you into kind of, why don't you have a this sort of archetype? So I'm really grateful that you're here, and I'm very grateful for your words.
And I'm so grateful that you pushed me with everything happening here. And I'm sure this is going to come up again in our conversation. I am not necessarily thinking at my best. And so the support and the nudge was really welcome. So please don't feel like you pushed me. Please feel like you said, "What about this?" And that particular this was exactly right.
Well, and you never see things from. It's very difficult to see things from another person's point of view. So you are
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of a pressure cooker at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll get into. I don't know how much else you want to say about Minneapolis, but you don't know what's coming out and what people are hearing outside.
Yeah.
So yeah. So but we are hearing you, and that's the one thing I can do. Sort of repost things
Mm-hmm.
and help with that. But I suppose let's maybe start with some of the tyrant kings from history and
Yeah.
and what actually the archetype of the tyrant king is.
Yes. So, for those of you who don't know, just so you have the context, this is being recorded in February 2026. I'm Laura Packer, and I live just outside Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we are fighting back against an incursion of thugs working at the direction of the president. And I'm saying this just for historical purposes because I'm thinking about that more and more. So, my understanding of the Tyrant King, and I welcome your understanding as well, is of someone who is in a position of power and believes themselves to be invincible and uses that power in ways that benefit only themselves or perhaps a small cabal of allies or sycophants. Um, Tyrant kings always fall. That's what the stories tell us. Tyrant kings do not win in the end, but the cost of their actions can be inestimable. What I think is important to remember about the archetype is that these tyrant kings are always people who come from a place of privilege. They are the children of gods, they are the children of the wealthy, they're born into the position, whatever it may be, and that they're not who they think they are. They think that they are gifted by God with this, and that what the stories teach us over and over and over again is that they are as human and breakable. They are often more fragile than the rest of us. So that's my understanding of it. Amy, I would love any other input that you may have into it.
I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I would also say, I mean, often they're told that they are gods. I mean, there has
Mm-hmm.
been lots of kings in history who are, who've been the sun gods, who are revered as god kings. And certainly when you come into mythology, as you say, they are the sons of kings, and they are almost always men.
Yes.
There is the occasional tyrannical queen, um, but they're different, and they are much, much rarer. And other people, feel free to jump in on the chat and put your perspectives and your ideas on this as well. And they believe that they have the right. They absolutely do have the power. I mean, they have the power, and they
Hmm.
believe that they have been given it for a reason, that they deserve it.
Yes, deserve it. Deserve it is a really good word. It is theirs whether or not they have earned it. That is their privilege, their right, that it is genetic unto them.
And it is
So
their
yeah, that's
destiny. So it's that thing of,
destiny.
they either have, they might have aristotic aristocratic blue blood.
Hmm.
They have the blood of gods. Whatever the reason is, they believe that they are better than everybody else. And they have been designed, created better than everybody else. They have the power, they deserve it, and they use it freely.
Hmm. It's what you brought up about women is interesting. I was looking for tyrant queens, and everyone whom I came across, whether in myth and folktale or in history, always had a terrible fate that was meted out by men. So those stories also have a lot of misogyny built into them. So I think that part of why we don't see tyrant queens is because it is men who are consolidating and grasping power, which is a whole other conversation. But I wanted to reflect back to that. I spent a lot of time thinking about Elizabeth of Bathory and if I wanted to bring her into this space. But her fate was atrocious, which was kind of satisfying for us now, hundreds of years later. But but again, she was reviled in history, written by men. So I think that may be part of why we don't see the tyrant queens, that their stories are told very differently because the role of the storyteller matters so much.
We'll come back to the role of the storyteller. I
Yeah.
want you to keep on kings for now.
Okay,
So,
I shall.
because I know you've got some examples, and actually, I know some people here are really familiar with your storytelling, and some people are not. So it'd be great to hear your voice as a storyteller if you want to tell us a bit of story.
I'll tell you a little bit. This is not terribly practiced, but I think that this suits our needs. We don't know what Minos's childhood was like. We know that King Minos of Crete was the son of Zeus and Europa. And so he, being the son of the greatest god of all, he and his brothers, I'm sure, were brought up as more than precious, as special, as divine, as indeed they were. Minos and his brothers were adopted by Asterion, the king of Crete, who so desperately wanted children of his own, and divine children at that, that when these three were offered to him, he took them with no hesitation. I imagine the lushness of their childhood, the soft skin of their wet nurses. I imagine the soft fabrics that surrounded them, the fine foods, the way that they were taught to fight and to live and to know themselves as better than other men. From the time they were infants, I am sure that they heard over and over, "You, the son of Zeus, the son of the king of Crete, how could you not believe you are special?" And so Minos grew to be a man. And, like some men, not like all, like those who know themselves to be special, he found his place in the world by stealing the kingship of Greek from his brothers, by declaring that he would be king and banishing them from their homeland, because he was the only one strong enough to do so, or so he believed. He believed many things about himself. He believed that he was entitled to the most beautiful wife of all and to have a dozen or so children with other beautiful women. He believed that his son was so extraordinary that when he went off and won games in Athens, of course he would. But when his son was killed, gored by a bull at the end of those games, Minos understood that the only thing he could do in response was demand tribute from Athens. 7 beautiful young men and women who would die because of his son's death. His grief turned into rage, turned into power. no room there for empathy or care or lingering sorrow. When he worshipped Poseidon and asked Poseidon to send him something perfect for sacrifice, how could Poseidon say no? Of course Poseidon would give King Minos whatever it was he wanted, and so a great white bull came forth from the ocean, water dripping from his flanks, the huffs of breath coming from his face, hot and smelling of salt. This bull, given forth to be sacrificed, was a thing of such extraordinary beauty that I wonder if perhaps Minos fell in love with him a little bit too. And his heart, being one that was not born to hold love, could think of it only as possession. And so instead of sacrificing the bull as promised, he set him aside and sacrificed another. And you know what happens next. You know that it was not Minos who was punished, but his wife instead, fated to fall madly in love with this beautiful white bull, whose breath was probably sweeter, whose skin was surely softer than her own husband's. And out of that, of course, the Minotaur was born. And even then, Minos thought only of power. He named his son after his own adopted father. But as the boy grew to be ungovernable, ungovernable things were to be set aside, not to be taught, not to be cared for, certainly not to be loved. And so Daedalus built the labyrinth. You know all of this. This is not a new story for you. But imagine Minos standing there watching this great structure be built to contain his horrific stepson. Imagine how he directed the slaves who were placing brick by brick. Imagine how satisfied he was as he thought that this was the greatest labyrinth that ever existed, that surely nothing could escape from here because it was done in his name, his certainty that the Minotaur would be contained. And so he was. Whether this poor misbegotten beast was lonely, whether he sang, whether he yearned for companionship, or whether he was only a monster is not written down in the stories. What is written down is that he lay at the heart of the labyrinth and killed all who entered there, and in turn was killed. I imagine Minos's rage when the Minotaur died, when his own daughter betrayed him. That rage is told to us when he pursues Daedalus, who seeks to escape from Minos's grasp. And Daedalus and his son escape, though of course, as you know, Icarus fell. Daedalus found himself on the island of Comicus, where he built his own life again, one riddled with regret and pain and sorrow. But Minos wanted what Minos wanted, because that is what tyrant kings do. Whatever they grasp for is surely to be theirs, and the thought that his wife lay with a bull over him, the thought that his misbegotten son was killed and betrayed by his own daughter, the thought that the architect could leave when he said that he was to stay, I am sure Minos was enraged. And so he left his kingdom in pursuit of Daedalus, asking everyone how they could get to the middle of a snail shell, knowing that Daedalus was the only one clever enough to do so. How he searched is not for this telling. Who he may have slain or harmed on his journey is not for this telling. But know that wherever the tyrant kings go, there is loss, that his footsteps are bloody. And when finally Minos arrived on Carnicus and found the answer to his riddle, telling him that Daedalus was there, he assumed that he would be given what he wanted and demanded a bath before he was to confront Daedalus and surely slay him. And in that bath he lay, drenched with boiling water, poured by the daughters of the king who knew that Minos was not a good man, their innocence sensing his evil. And drip by drip he was boiled to death. Tyrant kings never end well, even if they think they will never end. And as it was with Minos, so it was with Midas and Herod and others more modern, names I don't wish to sully my mouth with. They end, and that is what we should remember from the story. That's all, Amy.
And coming back and coming back. What are you going? Oh, you say it might not be a very practice, but I think it was just a perfect telling actually, and really highlighted some of your thoughts and some of the conversations that we've been having about tyrant kings. And I think just really emphasizes that all tyrant kings end up in their own labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they they just get more and more caught up in a feedback loop where nobody can is able to tell them the truth, where they just are surrounded by mirrors and they're just exactly like you're saying, sycophantic, just people always agreeing with them until they get this incredibly skewed version of themselves and the world, and there's no way to pierce through to try and bring them back to reality, so that they're just living in a completely different world to all the people that are living under their rule.
Well, as I was thinking about this, I think that part of it is that some tyrant kings, probably most, mythologically, historically, and in modern times, are people with disordered thinking in some way. However, what seems really consistent is that they do not experience compassion as children, that they are given everything, they have no limits set for them, they have whatever they desire, but that they don't have tenderness, they don't have care. So they don't learn that as children. And then as adults, that they are surrounded by sycophantic enablers. And so they're not required to have empathy. They are so insulated. I think that you said they get lost in their own labyrinth. They're contained in their own labyrinth at the end. I frankly think that they're in the labyrinth their entire lives because all they can hear are the echoes of their own voice, because they are so protected. Tyrant kings exist because they are protected by people who can profit from them. They can't exist if they don't have that kind of protection. And I think that that's what folklore and mythology and history tells us repeatedly, that they come into power because there are people who think that they will benefit by it. And that tyrant kings, in their own way, are really tragic figures. I struggle with saying that because of our own current tyrant king, whom I have very little care or empathy for. But during his first term, I will tell you that I worked really hard as a way to preserve my own humanity, to think about the child that he had been, the child who was uncared for and treated cruelly, because I didn't want to lose my own humanity in that moment. But I think they all have that, most of them anyway.
I think you're right. I think there has to be some sort of a deep-seated loneliness because there is that lack of capacity to love and to trust. Um,
Anyone.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so that those, as in that story that in Minus that you're telling about, that love becomes there's sort of the healthy version of an emotion and the not healthy version of emotion, and they have
Mm-hmm.
all the not healthy ones. So instead of love, it's possession,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is always this kind of entitlement that leads to far in excess of grief and rage that just kind of gets, again, is in that feedback loop of just getting bigger, and always seems to lead up to a situation where there is them and us. um, and certainly in folklore that's very specifically about their own position and their own emotions and things that have happened to us, and maybe historically if they don't have it in their mind, that in their own lives, then they manufacture it, because that is part of how they maintain their position, that to 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 solidify their rule there has to be an us, and to have an us there has to be a them. um
Mm-hmm. And there has to be someone who carries the responsibility of anything that goes wrong. It's never their fault. You know, Lear was happy to blame everybody else except for himself. Um, Midas, I'm sure, you know, it was his own greed that was his downfall, yet he never, all right, in some versions of the stories at the very end, he might have admitted his faults. But over and over and over again, it is because else it's someone else's fault, because these are people who are incapable, characters and people who are incapable of accepting the fullness of human experience. You know, in the Minos story, we don't have a lot of the detail that we as modern humans have come to look for in our understandings of narrative, right? So what his childhood was like, we don't know that. We don't know whether or not he ever touched on anyone tenderly without wanting something back for it. But based on what we do know about modern tyrants, we can probably make a pretty good guess about who he was. And it's not as if, for better or for worse, humans have changed that much in these thousands of years. One of my favorite examples of ancient stories still being so stunningly relevant, the Tyrant King, is Gilgamesh. I mentioned to you that I wanted to talk about him. In the texts and the tablets, Gilgamesh was horrific at the beginning, demanding his what is it, primogeniture, is that the word? His right of sleeping with women on their wedding night, all of that. He was a terrible king. He was cruel to the people. And so when the people cried out for help to the gods, instead of the gods punishing Gilgamesh, they sent him a friend. So Gilgamesh was raised with knowledge of his own divinity, was no doubt raised with an expectation, an understanding of another human being, and feel empathy and delight and joy, and then raging grief. It was in his raging grief that he was able to become a better ruler, because all of a sudden he could experience compassion for other people. When we deny those feelings, when we refuse to say that the grief we feel, the loss we feel, is ours to feel, suppress all of that, that's when we become horrific. And I think that's part of what Gilgamesh tells us. The part of the lesson, there are many lessons in Gilgamesh. Minos tells us that we will be destroyed if we continue on this path of selfishness and this path to own everything, right? Minos' end tells us that. But Gilgamesh's end tells us that for some, change is possible. And if we can connect with another human being and step out of that place of loneliness and solipsism, then it is possible to no longer be a tyrant king, but be a tragic king who cares for the people. And that's what I actually find really interesting in all of this, that the stories tell us that in isolation, without empathy, you cannot change, but with empathy you can. And I think that's a very powerful message for now as well as historically.
I think that's a hugely powerful and a hugely hopeful message, and that's what's coming in on the chat so much, is that both stories have kind of just have moved people to hope. um Partly that they always that tyrants do always end, um but also that the fact that there is a possibility of an ending with hope, and that humanity can change, because this is the other. We need to find hope in the stories, because but there is that thing of the Tyrant King keeps recurring. And
Yes.
we never lose the Tyrant King. And while there is lots of hope and there's lots of compassion, there are lots of hopeful stories, it is part of human nature that and as a society, we allow Tyrant Kings to rise. You know,
Yes, we
they're
do.
one person, and they rule over thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions. You know, but in all of these different situations, Tyrant Kings do rise. They're enabled to rise, and we let them rule us.
Yeah. I mean, what Jane just put in the chat about King Shahira, I can never pronounce that correctly. Could you help me?
Uh, Sharia, I don't know.
Okay.
Shahrazad I can cope with, but
Yeah. Um, But he was changed by the stories, and it was stories are about teach us empathy, right? And when you listen to enough stories, you feel empathy, and you are right. It happens again and again and again, and I'm sorry to say it's going to happen again. Koshai the Deathless is a good example of that, because while Koshai is defeated at the end by the ever clever Maria Morevna and the occasionally helpful Prince Ivan, he isn't killed. He's locked up, and I think there's the implication in there that Ivan opened the closet and let him out. Ivan unlocked everything. Someone else is going to do it again. And I think that is because people in power like being in power. I think this is fun. The Tyrant King is an interesting one because it's fundamental to human nature, as all of these are, of course. Foolish statement. But people like we like being in power, and we see the Tyrant King also enacted in small scale. How many families have an abusive family member who just completely dominates the family? That's the kind of family I grew up in, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one. So it happens at the small scale as well as the large. And these stories, I know that I'm stating the blindingly obvious for all of you, but part of why these stories last is that whether or not your political system with the Tyrant King is dominated this way, if not your own life, you know someone else like that. It works at a small scale as well as the big scale. The Fisherman's Wife is another good example of it. Or the Magic Flounder. There are different versions of it where the fisherman gets a flounder, and the flounder says that he's the king of the sea and offers wishes. And so the wife wants a better house, then she wants a better house, then she wants to be this, that, and the other thing, until finally she's pope and wants to be god, and then is demoted back to being the poor person she originally was. But that's the same story, this graspingness, this hunger. And in that story she exhibits no empathy and no compassion for her husband. The Tyrant King, in order to exist, needs to exist in a world where his empathy is unnecessary, or his kindness is unnecessary. And that only happens when you are removed from your community, when you have no community around you, because community holds us accountable for that kind of thing. So then I think what I'm saying is that another facet of the Tyrant King is that it requires not only enablers but isolation to work, and suppression of information, as we're seeing in the media right now. You're not getting much news from what's happening here in Minnesota, because the people in power know that the stories will change people's minds, and so they have to be quieted.
Well, and this is isolation is absolutely the key, and that's the other thing is in all of these stories, walls keep coming up, don't they? And it's kind of and
Mm-hmm.
walls can be sometimes they are invisible. There's a glass mountain, and kind of when you have communication barriers, you don't have to
Yeah.
necessarily be able to see the wall to stop voices and things coming through. But I mean, the amount of times that people build the walls, and I'm saying, kind of that's one of those theories that um matriarchal societies changed to patriarchal societies. The whole basis of society started to change when we moved from tents
Mm-hmm.
to settled houses,
And
because
to
you can't
land being
hear.
valuable.
Pardon?
Yeah, the land having value for individuals with their houses, not just communal.
Well, the land having value, but also you can hear through canvas.
Yes, you can.
There's
That's great.
you don't
Yeah.
have the same amount of privacy. You can be held accountable inside and outside, and once you've got locks on your windows and you've got doors and you can shut the rest of the world out, then you have an inside person and an outside person, and
Mm-hmm.
those two sides of yourself aren't always the same. And then this whole conspiracy of kind of you don't talk about what happens behind closed doors, kind of that you and that society becoming that we don't want to know what happens within your house. Your
Mm-hmm.
house is your castle, and certainly the Englishman's house is his castle, that phrase. And building moats and building kind of all of these defenses um makes a whole different way of holding society, and a whole different way of being able to block um voices, emotions. It stops the flow between people, and enables us to just literally cut off other people and to cut off empathy and to cut off all the things that you've been
Hmm.
talking about. Um, and it's ridiculous what people will try and build walls to stop, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's I mentioned this to you earlier. There's a story called Cato's Wall, which is from around Guinea in the sub-Saharan African continent, in which there's a very wealthy man who has a great deal of food and doesn't particularly want to share it with his community and is terrified of his own death. He doesn't want to share it with the community because he sees that when people don't have enough food, they die, and he doesn't want to die. So he holds on to all of his food, builds a wall to keep out death. And the story, and he's cruel to everyone. He's cruel to his neighbors. He denies help. He's unkind to his wife and children. But you can't keep death out with a wall. You can't keep life out with a wall either. And so his tyranny does him absolutely no good. As,
Hurrah!
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, and his wall, because you, I don't think you just said, but you said told me earlier. What's his wall made out of?
Yeah, so he has so much corn that or grain that in order to build his wall, he has the grain ground down and builds bricks out of the grain. So his wall is made of food. And when he begins to starve, he tries to eat his wall, which is a mixed with mixed success. But death comes. Death comes. And he is denied help over and over again. And when he finally gets help, he is so foolish as to then just eat the corn that he's given to use as seed corn. So I think that's another thing about the tyrannical king, or tyrants in any form, that they will demand help, but then they squander it. They squander help over and over again because they don't understand that for help to be effective, it often requires help from people. We were talking earlier about those who defeat the tyrant kings, and it's rarely done in isolation. Jack or any of the other characters who can defeat the Wicked King do it because they have help. Even if the help is just someone who is not just, is someone who gives them the useful thing. Or it's someone who has skill or whatever it may be. There's this delightful story from Mexico that I learned from Valentina Ortiz called General Cricket, about all the creatures in the forest and the jungle being dominated by the jaguar, who is a cruel and merciless king. And they want to figure out how to defeat him, but they are so weighed down by their poverty and their fear that they can't think of anything until the cricket says, I can do something. So he challenges the leopard to a fight, the jaguar, pardon me, to a fight, and whoever wins will be king. They're each allowed to bring help. So the jaguar goes and gets the tiger and the lion, thinking, we can defeat anybody. Well, the cricket gathers the mosquitoes and the bees and the fleas, and they win. They win because many, many small irritating things will bring down those in power, as we in Minneapolis are learning so very well. We will eventually. It might take more time. It will take more time, but they're not going to last.
No, and
So,
that's absolutely. I mean, like the small make the difference when they work together. But the sad thing is, which is what you started this piece of saying, is kind of that, you know, that the land that you end up with at the end, you don't end up where you were at the beginning.
no.
You know that the tyrant king always topples, but there's often a huge price to be paid,
Yes, there is.
and that's the thing. Yeah, the lion and the jaguar and the tiger cannot win against flies and mosquitoes and bees, but I mean, all the bees are giving their lives every time they sting, and all the rest are swatted. You know, kind of handfuls and hundreds of those creatures are swatted. There's always enough left. There's enough to defeat them, but there's a really terrible cost.
Yes,
And I
it
think
is.
that, and I think that's that there often is. There has to be that tipping point when there is enough to topple the king. But
And we're not there yet.
no,
We're not there yet. Um, but I have to say that what I have seen here has given me hope that I have not felt since November of 24, or really since November of 2016 here in the United States when Trump was elected for the first time. Seeing people what I'm seeing here is remarkable. So,
So tell us, what are you seeing? Because the thing is, stories are about heroes. You know, one of the reasons that you have a Tyrant King is so that the folk heroes can emerge. And the
hmm
people who topple the Tyrant King are the everyday people. They are the ones that have everything that the Tyrant King does not have. They
yeah,
have courage, they have compassion, they have empathy, they have the ability to listen, they have the ability to accept help, they have the knowledge that they are never going to be enough on their own, though they are willing to stand up and to be the spearhead.
hmm
Um, and and those are the role models, and those are the stories that do really give us hope. And that is the sort of the silver lining of this, is it does give people a chance to shine.
yeah. It gives us a chance to shine, and it also gives us a chance to treat this as a relay race. The care that people are taking with each other during this is remarkable. About, you're tired, okay, rest, someone else will pick it up. I've never seen community like this before in my life. So, what is happening here? This is happening all over the state and in other states in the United States. The media attention is mostly on what's happening in the city of Minneapolis because immigration forces are very thick on the ground in Minneapolis.
And so Minneapolis, as well as a democratic state,
Yes,
it didn't
Minnesota
vote
is,
for Trump,
yeah,
and it has
right.
a democratic governance
Yeah, Minnesota is a
underneath the Trump
Democratic.
regime.
Yeah, Minnesota is a Democratic state. The governor of the state was the vice presidential candidate in the last election with Kamala Harris. Tim Walz was the VP candidate. And so some of this is absolutely retaliatory because Walz has not stopped speaking out against the regime in Washington. But some of it is also that they want to use Minnesota as an example to show that we can be beaten down and the people are standing up. So, what's happening is immigration forces are going through the entire state with a real focus on Minneapolis, theoretically deporting people who have a criminal record. What is happening realistically is any person of color, anyone who is a member of the global majority who is not white, is at risk. Citizens, people who are here legally, people who've never, ever, ever committed a crime, are being scooped up by immigration and being sent to detention camps, which are concentration camps. And then some are being deported, some are lingering in those places, many have disappeared. So we have disappearances happening here. What has happened is that the communities that these folks live in, and communities of people all over the state who are, some of whom are people of the global majority, some of whom are white, many of whom are white, are standing up for their neighbors and creating mutual aid efforts. So there are people who are documenting what's happening with immigration. There are people who are gathering and packing food for families who cannot leave their homes. There are people who are doing patrols in neighborhoods and sending out alerts if immigration is seen. There are people who are standing watch outside of schools because they are picking up parents who are coming to pick up their children when they're leaving school. They are picking up children. So there's this massive community aid effort, mutual aid effort that is happening all over the state that has organized organically by people saying, that's not right, I'm going to do something about it. And then finding others who are doing something about it. It is remarkable. I have just, and I'm stating this here feels a little uncomfortable, but I will. I've actually just launched an effort to start collecting the stories of people who are involved in these efforts and the people who are being impacted by everything that's happening. And I'm doing that because of the ways that people are needing to be heard. I am trying really hard I'm doing a lot of different things that I'm not going to name here. But one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to spend my money at businesses owned by immigrants, because when you go into those places, they are desolate. The immigrants who used to go to all the restaurants and shop in the grocery stores are staying home because they're afraid. So I'm using the privilege of the color of my skin to go and eat Mexican food and eat Somali food and shop in an Asian market and this, that, and the other thing. Every time I do that, and I say to one of the proprietors in these places, I am so sorry. I hear stories. People are desperate to be heard. So while it's not the Tyrant King, is it okay with you, Amy, if I share two of the stories that I've heard?
Well, it is the Tyrant King because I think the thing
Yeah,
is, Tyrant King is completely linked to the land. And I mean,
yeah.
this is, we're never going to cover everything that we wanted to, but I mean,
I'm sorry.
there, take a moment, because this is big stuff and it's really important and it's happening, it's now, and you make me tear up as well. But it's not just tyrant kings. I think so often in folklore, the king is associated with the health of the land, and
Mm-hmm.
if the kingship, if the monarchy is sick, then that has so many ripples and so many effects on the land. And the whole thing is like a king doesn't exist in isolation from the people, even though he might think he does and act like he
Mm-hmm.
does. To have a king, you have to have a population, and it's how that population is treated that makes the tyrant king. So it's two halves of a whole. I think it's really important, and I think that these are stories that need to be shared.
Yeah. And also, I mean, thinking about the land, the current administration is stripping away environmental protections and destroying the land, quite literally, which is making people sick. And we're seeing big impacts from that just starting now, and it's only going to get worse. And the people who work the land here are often immigrants. And so crops have been rotting in the field. And if that isn't highly symbolic, I don't know what is. You know, people are hungry because they can't afford food because prices have gone up. Crops are rotting in the field because the people who would pick those crops are being deported or are too afraid to go work because the tyrant king thinks that he knows everything and wants what he wants when he wants it now. So,
So I love the stories that you've chosen, but I mean, I look at the situation, and the story that immediately comes to my mind is the story of King Erisicthan,
yeah.
which very briefly is another Greek story, but a king who he desecrated one of Ceres' groves because he wanted to build himself a beautiful palace. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be world famous. He wanted to be one of the superpowers in the Greek world, and he felt his kingdom was too small. And so he took a huge oak from Ceres' grove, so he could make this immense palace that the other world leaders could come and be amazed by. And of course, Ceres, the goddess of the crops, the goddess of the land, was absolutely furious, and so she called in the help of a famine. And famine came and visited Erisicthan and visited him with a hunger to devour. And so
Mm-hmm.
he just devours the whole of the land. He eats everything that there is. He takes all of the crops, all of the food, until he has no money left to pay anybody. And he ends up in the story as a beggar on the streets, just begging and begging and begging for food, until in the end he's so hungry that he begins to eat his own body, and he just devours his own flesh and his whole skin until there is just nothing left. And yeah, it kind of feels like we're halfway through that story.
It does. It really does. And it's played out quite literally where the current president has been tearing down pieces of the White House. He's literally been tearing down the people's house so that he can build a ballroom to his own glory. Um, and now he is eating himself. We see it over and over. Um,
Tell us some of the stories of the people.
yeah.
I'm gonna put you on speaker, and yeah, tell us some of
I
the
think
stories
that
of
I
the
just
people.
want to close with something about helping, a story about the helpers. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. I want to close with this story because it reminds me, and may remind you as well, that none of us are powerless against the Tyrant King. And we may not see that power clearly in the moment, but that we each have the capacity to do something. And doing something is better than doing nothing. And when we all do something, there is a cost, like you said, Amy, but kings topple. Kings topple. So I am doing some volunteer work to try and get people food. I'm volunteering at a food bank because there are families who are locked in and who are afraid to go out and get groceries because they're afraid that they will be picked up by ICE, immigration. I don't think I've ever heard a better nickname for something than ICE. So these families are in their homes, they're hungry, they're lacking sanitary supplies, they don't have soap, they can't wash their clothing, they're stuck. And so organizations have popped up all across the state to gather supplies for these folks. I showed up at this place to pack food so babies wouldn't starve in their own homes. And there was a lot of food, but there were no toiletries, there were no toothbrushes, there was no soap, there were no sanitary pads, there was no dishwashing liquid. And I'd like you to think for just a moment about a time when you were afraid or ill and you couldn't get clean because you were too weak to get to the shower or things were too difficult, and how terrible it felt to have that additional burden of your own skin in those moments. It is a terrible feeling. And so we do our best to provide supplies so people can at least have the comfort of being comfortable in their own skin. And there was none left. So I went to go buy some. And I went to a discount store. There, I'm sure stores like this elsewhere where everything costs $1 or $2. And I filled up cart after cart of shampoo and dishwashing liquid and toothbrushes and toothpaste and hairbrushes and some sweets for people because a little bit of luxury can be a nice thing, and everything I could think of. I'm walking through the store with a cart that is literally overflowing, and the other people there are looking at me like, who is this woman? What is she doing? Why is she taking all this stuff? There was a man, Latino, maybe in his 60s, maybe younger. He had the kind of face and body that tells you that he lived a hard life. He was thin and he had lines around his eyes and on his face, and his hands were curled a little bit with arthritis, his fingers thick with strength. And he and I passed each other a couple of times, and each time he looked at me, not sure what I was doing, and I smiled a little bit and kept going because. And then I passed him, and he looked at my cart, and he looked at me. He looked at the cart, and he looked at me, and then he said, "Thank you." And I nodded, because what else could I do? And I kept going around the store, filling up my carts, and word spread. Everybody in that store looked at me and said, "Thank you." And finally, when I was almost done, one woman came up to me, and she was, again, an older woman, neatly dressed, but her clothing was shabby. The cuffs were worn. The edges of her coat had that slightly oily sheen that fabric that's been worn too many times has. And she said, "Are you helping?" So I said yes. And she replied, "I want to help too. Let me give you something." I'd seen her in the store. I had noticed her because she was walking through the store and pulling something off the shelf and looking at it for a long time. And half the time she'd put it back again. Sometimes she would pull 2 things off the shelf, and always one went back. She opened up her wallet and she gave me $5. You don't have to do that. No, I want to help. It's not much, but. And I thanked her. I am sure I have never held a more precious $5 in my entire life, a more valuable $5. I went to check out, and am I allowed to curse on this show?
Yeah, go for it. It's for adults.
Okay.
It's our show. We can do what we like.
All right. So my apologies to anyone with tender ears, but this is what happened. The cashier saw me, and she saw the carts, and she said, "Are you fighting those fucking Gestapo?" And I said, "Yes." "Good." And I am quite confident she did not wring every single item out, just took things and put them in the bags. And then everyone in the store gathered to help me put my stuff in the car, and I drove away. People are desperate to help. I think it is, as much as it is human nature to have tyrants, it is at least as much human nature to help one another. Just the way that people helped Jack, just the way that people helped Maria Morevna, just the way that we help each other when we let ourselves feel compassion and empathy, which the kings cannot feel. We can. So when we share our stories, when we give somebody a buck or two because that's what we have, we are making a difference. We are being the mosquitoes and the bees and the fleas, and not all of us will still be here because kings are hungry. But we will be here. So that's what I got for you, Amy.
That's just so beautiful and a perfect ending. So thank you so much, Laura. And I'd like to thank everybody who's here and everybody who's watching, whenever you're watching, because I think that this is actually a really important thing as well. And I think one of the things we sometimes feel there's nothing we can do, and we can witness. And I think that is the thing, is kind of, you're making sure that the stories are getting out there, and we can listen and we can witness, and we can let people know that they are being heard, and that we do know, and that the word is getting out. I think that there are some organisations that we can also donate to and help, and we'll put some links to those in the notes afterwards if you tell me those, Laura.
I'm dropping one in the chat right now. This is a clearinghouse organization, so check that out.
That's great, yeah. And I know from you did an amazing kind of you had a whole evening of poets and storytellers that you hosted quite recently, and again there was organisations that you could donate to that. And I think that this is a time when, kind of maybe a lot of the time we think of ourselves as entertainers, as storytellers, and that we all know the power of stories, and we all know what comfort, what lessons, everything they can bring. But I think when the tougher times get, the more important stories are. Both the stories that we carry from our past, but also the stories that are happening right now. And thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing the stories of the people around you, and those stories that we are carrying with our civilizations forward, because there have been very many tyrant kings, and as you say, they have all been toppled. And as King Solomon's ring sort of always says, is this too shall pass. And humanity will continue, and there are, I think, hundreds of wonderful small kind acts for every one evil act of cruelty or thoughtless act of cruelty. So there's just been huge amounts of support in the chat. There haven't been any questions. I did promise that there would be a Q&A. We are sort of at the end of our hour, but if you have burning questions for Laura, please do put them up in the chat. At the moment, it's just beautiful story, Laura. Thank you. What a fantastic session. The power of words. Humbling. Laura, you are amazing. Thanks, Laura. Such important stuff. I'm so pleased you're finding fruit on the path of thorns. It's inspiring you. It's inspiring. Thank you for the insights. Yes, so lots of support, lots of love, lots of respect. You've moved people to hope. I think everybody's a bit kind of lost for words, really. But if you do have any questions,
yeah, please.
Now is the time to get typing. But in the meantime, I'm just, thank you so much. Just giving people a moment. And I think actually, I mean, you've ended on such a perfect note. I think people maybe don't want to take us too far away from that. So, taking the tradition on, we'll be back next month in March, March the 3rd. And it feels like a very fitting place to move on to, actually. We're going to have Zengazalka from Hungary. And her archetype is going to be the band of heroes. So it's very much that thing of kind of, of the band of heroes going, everybody having a talent, and the smallest being the one that absolutely saves the day at the end, and how it only works when everybody is really working together. I don't know if we'll be talking about some of the band of heroes taking down some tyrant kings, but it will absolutely follow on, I think, for tonight. Thank you for the first hand insight. Thanks so much, Laura, for both your stories and your insights. So powerful. I sat almost without movement as I listened to you talking. We do have a question, which is, how did the protesters organise in such large numbers? Because I'm sure Wisconsin is on the list.
May I make one recommendation for one organization? If you are in the United States and you're looking for a way to get involved, look for your local SURJ group, SURJ, Stand Up for Racial Justice, or the Women's March. Both of those organizations will share information, or Indivisible. All of those have lots of information about things you can do. And
Brilliant.
they are coming to your state. No doubt about it, wherever you are. So SURJ, which is Stand Up for Racial Justice, Indivisible, or the Women's March.
Great. So there you go. Thank you, and good luck to everybody in the States and elsewhere.
Yeah. We are in a difficult global time. The globe is moving more towards nationalism. Individual countries are becoming more and more nationalistic. So this is a hard time. So remember that you cannot fight if you don't take care of yourselves. Please take care of yourselves.
Yeah, it is the thing. Put your own oxygen mask on first. It's not selfish.
Yeah.
It's necessary.
Nope.
Absolutely necessary. Yes. Currently, I'm feeling very grateful for where and when I live, but I also know that we're on a fairly slippery slope, and nowhere is safe. Yeah. So yes. So Simon's agreeing.
Yeah.
The UK is. We do tend to follow America. I'm really hoping that we don't, and we're kind of speaking up.
Yeah.
But not everybody agrees. I mean, sort of, we're definitely in a bubble here of people who think in a certain way, but there are plenty of ways, plenty of people who think in Britain and America in a different way. Yeah, we're going, Simon is my news source because he researches so well. There are definitely kind of people that I trust on social media to get accurate news and accurate descriptions of what's happening in the world. And you, Laura, one, and Simon is another. Thank you so much for your company and your stories tonight. And normally at this point I say, if you've enjoyed tonight, you can find out more about Laura. I'm not going to say that. If you've been inspired, if you've been challenged, if you've been moved to action, if you've been moved to share stories, if you want to find out more about Laura, then you can find Laura at www.laurapacker.com and www.thinkstory.com. And you have books, you have various things that you can support Laura with. So I will be back next month with Sengazalka, and we have lots of challenging conversation. It's all story based, but we touch on all sorts of different topics. You can find all of those. They are all free at the Taking the Tradition on YouTube channel. You can go back and look in the archives. And thank you again to my patrons who support me and make all of this happen. You're all absolutely blooming marvellous. But for now, good night. Thank you for listening, all of you out in the world, and thank you for helping me and my guest Laura Packer to take the tradition on.
Thank you.